How's it going, guys? You like to eat food? I love eating food. We're going to find out 7 ways British and American restaurants are very different. Channel's called Lost in the Pond. Links to the original video will be in the description section down below as always. I love this dude's channel. His name's Lawrence. He's a British guy, lives in like Chicago or something, and he does like a lot of videos on comparisons between British and United States and how they differ. So, without further ado, we're going to jump right into it and find out 7 ways British and American restaurants are very different.
And I'm sure to some degree there'll be places in Britain that sell Chicago-style pizza even though it's nothing like it. Or even in my birthplace of Cleethorpes, Chicago-style burgers, whatever that is. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond. And one of those memos pertains to restaurants. And because food is involved, restaurants happen to be a kind of central hub for where British and American differences play out more broadly. Because we see differences in not just the food, but the terminology that's used and some of the customs that are practiced and the practices that are customed. And of course, the mere concept of a restaurant, I don't know why I'm doing that, the mere concept of a restaurant is universal. But the way that they are presented to and used by Brits and Americans is subtly and sometimes not so subtly different. And so here are 7 ways in which British and American restaurants are very different. For Brits moving to or even visiting the United States of America, one of the biggest culture shocks, at least for me, was the kind of round-the-clock attention that servers pay to their customers. What's that? Your glass of water is empty? We can't be having that. American servers come right on over, minus the whistling sound, usually. And in between that and...
It's because they rely on tips, so they feel like the more they service you, the more faster they get your water, more likely you'll give them a better tip. It's just based on the tip-based economy, I believe, is the situation with that one.
And a bite of your broccoli, American waitstaff will be over just to simply ask, how's that food tasting? Can I get you anything else?
It can get quite annoying, to be honest with you.
Golly gee, that's a nice accent. Which part of Australia are you from? Those kind of questions. Whereas British waitstaff are staff that, wait to come over until you're all done. And part of this is tied to the notion of tips and tipping. In Britain, contrary to popular belief, servers do make a bulk of their income from tips. But unlike in America, tipping is voluntary.
Really? I didn't know that. But I guess like you said, unlike in America, it's voluntary. So the voluntary part, I guess, definitely, I knew that part, but I didn't know that it was still a thing and that they made a big portion of their income from it. News to me.
And not at all expected. A lot of Brits who come to the United States, myself included, don't know this at first. In my case, I even asked the waiter how much I should tip, so I gave her the 75% she recommended and moved on. Of course, with time, I came to learn.
Keep playing. 75, that's a joke. He knows that he ain't gonna be no 75% tip. That's crazy.
And that the expected amount here in the United States of America is 15 to 20% of your bill and/or...
It goes up. Now they're saying 15 to 20. It used to be like 10 to 15%. When I was a kid, I think they were saying 5%. I don't know. Next thing you know, it will be 75%, man.
Check will come onto terminology later. It's often been noted, especially within the fast food industry, that portion sizes in the United States of America are much larger than their European counterparts.
I bet. Now, I don't know. I don't have experience. I'm not from Europe. I've never been there, but I've done some reactions to food tours. By the way, Mark Wine's channel. It was a German food tour, Munich, Germany street food tours, Copenhagen street food tours. Now, I don't know about Copenhagen, Denmark, but Germany, they give you some portion sizes, let me tell you. From what I've saw, and they're all about their sausages and their breads, like 3,000 different kinds of breads. It's crazy.
But often, depending on where you go, this can also be true of sit-down restaurants. One of the first major American sit-down chain restaurants that I visited was a little place called Applebee's. And the likes of Applebee's, but also the Olive Garden or TGI Friday or any number of other chains, your appetizer almost feels like a main course / entree. Again, terminology later. And by the time that the actual main course arrives, you eat it merely out of politeness, while pretending that this is all fine. And then, this is the really funny bit, they ask you...
He ain't lying. This is real.
If you want to see the dessert menu,
Yeah.
of course you can't say no because you're addicted to cheesecake. And that's always humongous and rich as opposed to humongous and poor, which is what you are when you leave the restaurant. Except that cheap joke doesn't quite work because American food on the whole is actually cheaper compared to the food served in Britain, which is partially how you account for the portion size difference. Now, after a while...
No, I never knew that. I didn't know it was... it's a lesser quality, though. I guess that's a given, right? I should know that. It's a less than quality.
While I noticed that there were Americans all around me that instead of plowing through this mountain of calories in one sitting, answered yes to what was then an unfamiliar question to me. That's right, it's completely normal in the United States of America to have your food boxed at the end of the meal with the intention of you taking it home and refrigerating it.
You know, and that's real. You know, you done spent all the money for your food, and like you said, you filled up on appetizers. You got your main course, and you're just busting through it just to be polite. You don't want to waste it. I don't like to waste, so I'm like, yeah, let me get that box. I done spent $20 on this meal. I got half a cheeseburger left and a bunch of potato wedges. I'm gonna take those home. Hell yeah, I'm gonna eat those later that night. I got a snack for later, right? Why wouldn't I?
Or just eat it later that night if you're feeling lucky. And of course now that makes sense, right? I mean, you've paid your money for that food. You want to get your money's worth. But on top of that, it cuts down on waste. But at first, just because of what I was used to back home, it seemed weird to be taking leftovers home from a restaurant. In Britain, as evidenced by this BBC article from a few years back, we've historically felt embarrassed even to ask for a box or a doggy bag because we are, I don't know, I haven't a clue why, actually. Either way,
He's like, I don't know why. Why haven't we been taking our food back home to the house? He's like, man, I've been missing out over there.
I think leftovers are great to the extent that I have Indian food for breakfast. Don't judge me. Buffets, aside from the fact that America seems to be just a tad more into them than Britain, there's an aspect of the buffet going experience that differs greatly between the two countries. Where I was from, depending on the buffet in question, I almost got the impression that it was rude to the kitchen staff to ask for a new plate when you're going up for seconds. In other words, whenever I went for, say, a Chinese...
They actually want you to get a new plate every time you go. Cleanliness reasons, a lot of times, nobody wants you to have your plate with your leftovers and your ate off of food and possibly drool or whatever is all over your plate, dripping into the fresh food. So, and then some people don't know how to scoop their food. They'll scoop their food onto the plate and then they'll drag the plate on, or bounce the plate or the spoon off of the plate to get the rest off the scoop. So, you got to get a new plate at a buffet like that just for cleanliness reasons. For the most part, I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know for sure. I'm not a restaurateur or anything like that, obviously, but just speculation.
Buffet, I would go up, get my plate, scoop on all the food, go back to my table, realize that I am unrelentingly gluttonous, and then go back up for seconds using the same plate. It made me feel good that while devouring lots of solids, I'd done a solid to the kitchen staff. That could be taken so many ways. Whereas once I moved to the United States, I realized that this was considered either weird or unhygienic. At American buffets, customers are expected to get a new, cleaner plate when they go up for seconds because
I got yelled at not yelled at, but I got told about it when I was a kid. I went up to get seconds and I kept the same plate and somebody came up and they're like, no, grab a new one. I thought the same way as him at first, but now I know.
This is a measure seen at preventing cross-contamination. But I have to say, after practicing both methods, neither has caused me any personal problems. But while we're on the subject of Chinese food, that brings us on to this. I think it's fair to say that in both Britain and America, ethnic food, or food that is usually associated with a country that is not this one, is extremely popular. And to varying degrees, no matter if you're talking about the United States or Britain, the same countries are often represented at the dinner table. Off the top of my head, the big one is Chinese food. Except you guessed it, British Chinese food and American Chinese food is vastly different. In Britain, Chinese food is often spicy, sometimes curry-based. In the US, on the other hand, Chinese food tends to be centered around standalone fried meats, usually of the chicken variety. Now, these are not entirely absent from Britain, but one way that America differentiates itself is that its Chinese food tends to be a lot sweeter than in Britain. But whichever way you slice it, I planned that. both British and American Chinese cuisine is a modified version of what actual Chinese people eat in China. And this seems to be a common theme that actually unites Britain and America. Take, for example, Indian food. While it should be pointed out that Indian food is more widely eaten in Britain than in the United States, and that in my experience, certain Indian curries tend to be spicier than their American counterparts, neither is anywhere near as spicy as authentic Indian. On the other hand, in terms of everything I just said there, almost the exact opposite is true of Mexican food. America, by virtue of its neighbourly status with Mexico, eats way more Mexican food than Britain does, even if, by all accounts, tacos and the like have started to make waves in Britain.
Tacos are amazing, guys. Eat some tacos today. Watch the rest of these videos that I'm putting out today. Go watch more videos. I got some old ones. I got reactions to Germany, Australia, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, all sorts of countries. After you watch those, go get some tacos. Trust me on that.
Britain. But even America's version of Mexican food is often a departure from what's eaten south of the border, with authentic Mexican food often less spicy than Americans are used to. And it was in the restaurants of America.
I think what it is because we have the idea that, Mexican food's spicy, so we overdo it. We're like, if it's not spicy, it's not real Mexican food. There's a lot of Mexicans I've met, surprisingly, that don't really care for it being spicy, or they'll do it mildly spicy. Whereas Americans think that they got to go over the top with the habaneros and the jalapenos, which they're good. Trust me. But it's not authentic. I've had authentic Mexican food from authentic Mexicans, and vastly different for sure. Amazing though. Both versions. Americanized tacos are good. So are original Mexican tacos. They're both good.
That I got a first-hand feel for how America likes to modify the national dishes of other countries to create what amounts to their own version. Yeah. They even do this with English cuisine, and that brings us on to this. If you were to ask me to name 3 dishes from both countries, off the top of my head, I would
burgers, hot dogs, fried chicken in America. England, you got fish and chips. You got the beans, right? The English breakfast with the beans. And then, I don't know, crumpets for the third one? I don't know.
I would say this. For Britain, fish and chips, Sunday roast, and a full English breakfast.
I got 2 out of 3. The English breakfast and the fish and chips. Sunday roast, didn't get that. What did I switch it up for? I don't know what I said, but it was wrong.
For America, hamburgers, hot dogs, and pizza. And yes,
okay, I got 2 out of 3 wrong on that one too. I said pizza. I was trying to think okay, that's too Italian, but then again, we Americanized it. I thought about it. I didn't say it because that thought process. But yeah.
I realized that all of those have disputed or undisputed origins in.
Well, yeah, hamburgers come from Hamburg, Germany. Pizza comes from Italy, and hot dogs, I don't know, probably Europe somewhere.
Germany and Italy, but over time they have become synonymous with the United States. But to a lesser degree, and because of American influence, hamburgers, hot dogs, and pizza can all be found in restaurants in the UK.
So hot dogs are from Germany too. Makes sense. They're all about sausages and stuff. Hot dogs basically just another version of a sausage, essentially.
And I'm sure to some degree there'll be places in Britain that sell Chicago-style pizza even though it's nothing like it. Or even in my birthplace of Cleethorpes, Chicago-style burgers, whatever that is. But in reverse, whenever America tries to replicate popular British dishes, it's sort of like being in an alternate universe. It's great, but it's different. Very rarely do you get fish and chips where the chips/fries are thick cut and greasy, and the fish is singular and large. Instead, you usually get 3 or 4 smaller pieces of fish that are usually a tad saltier than what you'd expect back home.
Okay.
Oh, and did I mention there's no mushy peas?
Mushy peas, you do that? You put that on your fish and chips, your french fries?
Honestly, it's like being in the south of England. And in terms of the other two, the Sunday roast and the full English breakfast, well, I found those a lot harder to come by in the US than fish and chips. Even at those pubs that,
Really?
every state has, that purport to be authentically British. And lastly, we can't talk about British versus American restaurant differences without talking about the terminology. You see, it's one thing to get your food boxed at the end of a sit-down meal, but many of us might like to take it home without sitting down in the restaurant in the first place. In Britain, I always knew this as getting takeaway, which is why I was profoundly confused when I worked in an American office environment and they talked about the key takeaways from the meeting. I thought I was getting curry and chips. In America, this is referred to as takeout or sometimes carry out. And regardless of portion size, we can't even agree on what to call each meal. In the US, for the most part, the meal immediately preceding the main meal is usually known as an appetizer. In Britain, I always refer to this as a starter, but some, as the French do, might call it an entree.
But to be fair, when you're in a restaurant, the waitress will normally ask you, is there any, do you want any appetizers I can get, to get you started? So they do the started part, it's like, to get you started, would you like some appetizers?
And this is where things get confusing, because Americans and Canadians alike use the word entree to mean the main meal. For us, the main meal is usually known as the main course.
Main course for me here too. Entree sounds too rich and fancy. Your commoner person around here like myself, we call it the main course.
If it's a Sunday roast, that main course will include a Yorkshire pudding, and this is where things get doubly confusing.
I never had that.
Because we in Britain also use the word pudding as a catch-all term for dessert.
News to me. News to me. Okay, so the Pink Floyd song says you can't have any pudding if you haven't ate your meat. They're not talking about pudding then. They're talking about dessert in general, I bet. Wow. Mind blown. Wow, I never knew that. That's crazy.
In fairness, we do also interchangeably use the word dessert. In America, the word pudding is more
You
specific.
said in Venice?
Yes, we do also. We in Britain also use the word pudding as a catch-all term for dessert. In fairness, we do also interchangeably use the word dessert. In America, the word pudding is more specific and the catch-all term has been deserted
Thought he said something about Venice. I guess he didn't.
in favour of dessert. And the implements with which we eat this food, i.e. the knife, fork and spoon, is known collectively in the United States as silverware, whereas this word,
Utensil.
when used in Britain, would pertain more to ornate metal plates, or perhaps metallic jugs, or sports trophies. A lot of the time, instead, we'll collectively refer to knives, forks and spoons as cutlery. And as we all know, it's very rude to leave a restaurant without paying. And this is why we ask for the bill, or at least we do in Britain. Because most of the time here in the US, Americans will ask for the check. And that's it for this episode. Let me know in the comments below if you've been to restaurants in both countries and what some of your observations were. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that my videos don't get lost in the pond.
Check his channel out, guys. Amazing, amazing content. That is Lawrence from Lost in the Pond. You can find the links to the original video down below. Hit like, hit subscribe, and have a super fun, awesome day. Take care.